All right. Well, it's great to be here. Super excited. I think you guys are in for a pretty big treat because we're going to have some cool announcements in this conversation today. Okay. So I'm Alonso. I work at Mysten Labs. I'm the chief economist. I know a bunch of you. If I haven't met you, come introduce yourselves. Looking forward to meeting you. So what I was thinking about, coming into this talk is we're a very international group, right? Like there's a bunch of people here from Paris, other parts in Europe, London, Berlin, the United States, New York, Miami, San Francisco, Asia, etc. And I was kind of thinking, like, imagine like all these big cities if they couldn't connect and people couldn't move from one to each other and they couldn't trade, economic, assets and all these kind of things and products. Like the world wouldn't be so interesting, right? Like the global economy is more than the sum of its parts. I feel like that's a little bit of what happens in crypto with, bridges and cross-chain communication protocols. Like if each chain just sort of lived on itself, like the world wouldn't be so interesting. So anyways, I thought that was a good segue to talk about bridges and more broadly about Axelar. And you're going to tell us your own vision. But why don't we start with what's your story, Georgios? How did you get to crypto? How did you get to Axelar? Like what's your background?
Amazing. First of all, I'd love to thank Ryan, yourself, Alonso, and the rest of the Mysten Labs team for kindly hosting me here today. And amazing explanation of Axelar. I'll actually take some notes. Maybe you should help us pitch next time.
You should hire me.
So my name is Georgios Vlachos. My story starts in Athens, Greece, and I think that's where our first common points are with the Sui and Mysten Labs team, in that many of your executives and a lot of your team is actually from Greece, right? And if I'm not mistaken, you have an office in Athens with how many engineers?
That's right.
You have like 10 people or so right now?
I think it's more like 10 or it's more like 15. Actually, some of you folks may be familiar with the solutions engineering team at the foundation in Mysten. This is a team that works with builders to make sure they can have the best developer experience in Sui, and they're based in Greece. Partly, I think, in Athens, partly in Thessaloniki. So, yep.
Excellent.
Right.
So if you grow up in Greece, it's not as developed a country as the US or many other European countries. So a lot of people end up doing theory and computer science. That's why if you look at all of the Greeks in the crypto space, almost everyone is either a developer or a protocol architect, right? And back in Greece, I found my passion in mathematics when I was in high school. I spent my last 2 years just studying math full-time by myself. For those of you who are familiar, I ended up participating in this competition called the International Mathematical Olympiad. I was the first Greek student to win a gold medal at this competition. And as a next step, MIT accepted me to study computer science. At MIT, I started working with Silvio Micali, who many of you may know as the founder of Algorand, and also my co-founder now, Sergey, and we were the founding team for the Algorand project. Back in the day, we were building something similar to what Sui is doing today, right? Just a super fast proof of stake blockchain. Of course, you guys, at the end of the day, have been way more successful and have done extremely well. And that's why we're here. But long story short, once we launched Algorand, we recognized how hard it is to onboard users and developers to a new ecosystem. And that was our initial motivation for starting Axelar. How can we allow developers to build on the best platform for their use case while allowing access to users that are on these other platforms, right, and solve this fragmentation issue in the space?
That's awesome, and that's a very impressive background, I would say. I don't know if everyone heard it, but he was a gold medalist at the Mathematical Olympics. So congrats on that, and I think it's just very exciting to have you building on crypto. I think one thing you said that I think it's very much in sync with what we care about Sui is focused on the developer and the developer experience, and we're going to touch on that in a second. But maybe before we go there, why don't you tell us quickly, like, what is Axelar? Like, how do we think about it? What's the vision? What do you guys want to achieve? Where is Axelar today? What are the ambitions?
Yeah, let's start talking about the problem that we're solving, right? So our working assumption has always been that there's going to be many chains, right? Potentially even thousands of chains. And assuming Sui succeeds, maybe it's going to be way less, but the point is that there's going to be a lot of chains. And when you have a lot of chains, you have fragmentation. Just to try to quantify the problem a little bit, right? If we look at any single chain today, the way users interact with applications is you go on Uniswap, you're going to do a swap. Then maybe we go on Aave, you get a loan. You go on NFT, right? Or you go buy an NFT, or you go on Elixir, right? And you do some other kind of trade. But empirically, what we've seen is that every fourth or so transaction on the blockchain is across a new application. And in a fragmented world where big applications occupy their own block space and live on their own blockchain, those cross-application transactions are all going to be cross-chain. And if we assume that every fourth transaction is going to be cross-chain, that's 25% of all transactions, so a massive amount, right? And we need to abstract away all the complexity, otherwise the technology is going to be unusable.
So let's maybe double click on exactly how Axelar thinks. And I'm coming from a little bit of a DeFi perspective because that's sort of what I do. And I think when we think about DeFi and we think about bridges in particular and cross-chain communication protocols, we think about liquidity. And one of the things we get most nervous about when talking about bridged assets is the security, right? We know that bridges had been hacked in the past and problems have been happened and money has been lost. And sometimes today, even when you see that there's a lot of sort of bridged liquidity into places like Sui or other ecosystems, maybe the yields are higher to reflect those risk premia of the security of the bridge. And potentially if a bridge such as Axelar is even more secure, those yields can go down. So how does Axelar sort of deal with those security challenges, making sure that those billions of dollars that are secured through Axelar, we can be confident that that there are guarantees that that's going to be safe?
That's a great question. I'd actually like to break it into two parts. The first part is bridging. Yeah. So bridging itself is not the end game of Axelar, right? And then no matter how you do cross-chain, these security issues persist, right? Even if you're not a bridge. So I'll talk about that as a second part. But just to go back 4 years ago, when we're starting to build Axelar, if you look at how people were solving this fragmentation, they were launching those centralized bridges. You may be familiar with REN protocol from back in the day, multi-chain. It's kind of an interesting story because all of those were claiming to be decentralized, right? And they even had these fake dashboards where they had like names of 50 different validators. But at the end of the day, as it was proven, all of the funds were held either by a founder or some key member. And inevitably, when those keys were compromised, the funds were lost, right? Multi-chain took 3 years for this to happen, but now all of the funds are gone, right? Hundreds of millions of dollars, and it's the same with some of the other big hacks in the space, right? So the centralization was one of the big problems. The second problem was that all those were bridges, right? So to do a transaction cross-chain, you had to go to your wallet, you had to go to this new front end, you have to issue a transaction, then change the network on your wallet, issue the transaction, potentially pay gas fees on both sides. It was 4 or 5 different steps, right? So the solution is not bridging, it's something else. And that something else is to actually build a platform for cross-chain applications, right? So the way we like people to think about Axelar is that it's a programmable interoperability platform. Think for a moment how on a single chain, people build primitives like DEXs, money markets, NFT marketplaces. With Axelar, we allow developers to build similar applications that span all blockchains. So you can build a cross-chain DEX, which is effectively what a bridge is. Right. You can build a cross-chain money market, a cross-chain NFT marketplace, right? So we decided to focus exclusively on the architecture, and then we have multiple bridges on top, like Interswap, Squid, and many, many more building on top of Axelar. And we're hoping a lot of those, with the upcoming integration of Axelar and Sui, are going to also be available on your platform. Yeah. Let me just pause here. I'm going to talk about the security and the decentralization in a bit, but let me know if that made sense.
It makes a lot of sense, and I'm actually really excited that you sort of double-clicked on this point because I think often we just think about these things as, they're bridges, you can bring liquidity from one place to another, but I think the way you described it in the sense of a cross-chain interoperability platform is so much stronger because you can do so much more. And in that sense, actually, I'm very excited that we're here today because I think we're ready to hear that Axelar is coming to Sui and it's coming to Sui soon.
Very soon.
Very soon. So that's we're going to have a few more announcements today, but that's the first one. We're really excited to be working together. So now let's talk about perhaps the security issue about Axelar. Now that we understand it's a cross-chain interop platform.
Absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, all those early solutions, all claiming they're decentralized, but they were fully custodial, right? So with Axelar, we started by building out a blockchain, right? Now, why would you build a blockchain? We built a blockchain because that's the only way we know to create and incentivize a decentralized validator set. Right? So Axelar itself, we like to think of it as a blockchain connecting blockchains. We have our own blockchain. We create a single connection with other blockchains in the ecosystem. And through Axelar, you can route messages to many of the other chains. Right? So it's kind of a hub and spoke architecture, like you would have with a custodian in the middle. But every time you pass a message through Axelar from one chain to another, it is secured by a majority of the biggest validators in the space. Right? I think the other important piece is that the Axelar validators are the biggest validators of Ethereum, of Solana, of some of the other chains, right? So it has a very similar security level as all of the proof-of-stake chains it connects to.
Got it. And I think like when people talk about, especially like layer ones, I think one of the most, the first questions people ask is, what is the story behind scalability? Because we all have this promise of, we want to onboard the next billion users to Web3, so how are you going to do it? But you gave us a stat earlier saying, 1 out of every 4 transactions is cross-chain, which means that, if layer ones and layer twos and all these things end up serving hundreds of millions, if not billions of users, then the interop platforms such as Axelar, they also need to scale. So what is the scalability story behind Axelar?
Great. So I think when people think of scalability, they think about 2 different things. One is scaling to many different chains. Axelar currently has 60 chains, and we're soon going to be expanding to many, many more. And the other one is how you can process a lot of transactions, right? If each individual chain is processing millions of transactions or billions of transactions per day, how can Axelar potentially process even a multiple of that, right? So on the first aspect, the scalability to many chains, it goes back to this architecture I talked about earlier, having a blockchain that connects blockchains. With Axelar, we can take any new blockchain like Sui, which is what we're doing as we speak, and we're creating a one-off connection to the Axelar hub. Now, if we want to be able to pass a message from Ethereum over to Sui, we actually have 2 different steps. Right? The first step is that a relayer service passes the message from Ethereum over to Sui, our validators approve, collectively sign the message, and the different relayer service passes the message to Sui. This is very different than virtually every other solution you may have seen in the space that works in a pairwise manner, right? Like you may be familiar with Layer 0, Wormhole, some of the other bridging protocols, which again are more on the application layer. Everything in the space today is point-to-point, right? And in mathematical terms, if you want to think about the complexity, with Axelar, you want to connect 10 chains. You have to manage effectively like 10 connections. With any other solution, you have to manage 45 connections, right? It scales quadratically. And maybe I think this is a point I really like to talk about. So maybe I'll also double-click on why this is important for some of the enterprise partners that we have. I know at Mysten Labs, you're also working with many, many enterprises and real-world asset issuers. I think for players like this, they want to have control of their stack, right? So let's assume you're a big financial institutions, which I won't name since we have NDAs with all of them, but they launch their own chain. And they want to be very careful about what information they pass to the public world and who have access rights to their chain. So if they have to work with any of the other solutions and they want to connect to, say, Ethereum, to ZK Sync, to Sui, they would have to create one-off connections to each of them and permission that connection, right? They run a permission service that connects them. Right. While with Axelar, what they do is they create a one-off permissioned connection to Axelar, and then from that point on, our decentralized set of services can forward the message, which is already public, to any of the other chains they want. This does a couple of things. One, it's much cheaper for them because they don't have to maintain 10 connections and have many more engineers managing those things. So that's number one. It's also much easier to do, right? Because it's a single point of integration and you get it. So I know all kinds of blockchain developers like this, but in particular institutions and a lot of the real world asset issuers love this because it gives them a lot of flexibility into how to connect to many, many chains.
Got it. This is a really cool sort of architectural decision in Axelar that makes it very powerful. I think it's the type of innovation that once you hear about it, you're like, well, weren't all platforms created that way in the beginning? Why did we have these sort of pairwise connections, which make it like very clunky? And you should say, it grows quadratically with the number of new chains. I guess like putting back my DeFi hat for a second, one big challenge that we have in some chains with bridged assets is that sometimes the bridged tokens or bridged assets are fragmented in the sense that they're different depending on what chain they're coming from. So if you have like bridged USDC, if it's from Solana, it's a different bridged USDC than if it's from Ethereum or Avalanche or whatever. And that is very complicated for DeFi protocols and users to play around because it fragments liquidity. But it sounds like the Axelar solution provides a kind of different world. Is that true?
Yeah, so actually, we've seen this with a couple of chains, right? And this is not what Axelar does by default, though. Again, Axelar is a platform, so you can imagine a developer building this kind of user experience on top of Axelar, right? But since day one, we were always focused on providing the optimal user experience, right? So we've actually architected something slightly different that allows users to onboard to a single asset on a destination chain, even if they're onboarding from a different chain. And actually, I think this is a great segue to talk about what we're planning to do with Squid and Sui and the central limit order boot that you have on the chain. So basically, we're planning to introduce these big pools that are going to have multiple assets. Let's say you want to be able to bridge ETH over to Sui, right? We're going to create a big pool that has ETH from Arbitrum, ETH from Avalanche, ETH from Ethereum mainnet. And when the user onboards to Sui through that asset, there's going to be a swap behind the scenes, and the user is only going to receive the native asset, right? They're not going to receive a different bridge version. So while sometimes you still need this fragmentation on the pool level, because there's no other way to natively bridge ETH across chains, the end product is going to be the same, right? Like the user is only going to get one version of ETH, and you have no fragmentation. This flow has been live very successfully in the Cosmos ecosystem. DYDX is one of the app chains that has used this very successfully. And yeah, we're looking forward to expand this to Sui. If you don't mind, maybe I'll go and talk a little bit more about this, because there's a second way in which we can onboard assets to Sui without any fragmentation. But
Please do.
This thing requires opt-in from the actual issuers of the asset, right? Because with ETH, the issuer is the ETH blockchain itself, right? And they're not going to give Axelar minting rights on different chains. But if you're a real-world asset issuer, and I'll talk about as an example for Ondo Finance. Ondo Finance is a close partner of Axelar, and they're already live on Sui. Now, Ondo Finance, what they do for their native yield-bearing stablecoin USDY is they have given minting rights to Axelar on the different chains. So if you want to go from Ethereum to Sui and move the asset, you will be able to burn it on Ethereum mainnet through Axelar, pass a message to Sui that will mint the asset and deliver the asset to the user, right? And as I know, Alonso, we haven't discussed about it yet, but in my trip to Hong Kong the last few days, I actually met two different real-world asset players that are actively working to launch on Sui. So I think we're all talking to the same players on that front, right? So excited to work with more real-world asset players on this native minting and burning, and even further optimize the user experience and reduce slippage.
Yeah, that's incredible. And by the way, I think being able to have this functionality and these type of assets enabled in a much more efficient cross-chain communication platform like Axelar is really going to be a catalyst for Sui DeFi, which, as if you went to Adeni's talk in the morning, you would have seen how the TVL, how the volume numbers, how the usage and the DApp integrations into Sui DeFi are really growing. And we only expect to see more with further catalysts like this. You talked about Squid. You've announced that Axelar is coming to Sui very soon. You've announced that Squid is coming to Sui very soon. And I think one thing we're all very excited about today is another part of infrastructure which is very different from Axelar, but it's also a key component of this ecosystem that we're trying to build, which is DeepBook. DeepBook is this fully on-chain central limit order book in which everything happens on-chain, the routing, the matching, the settlement. DeepBook is already live. It already handles regularly $50 to $100 million of daily volume. What role is DeepBook going to play with Axelar, with Squid, in this sort of ecosystem and these cool new applications that you're talking about?
No, I think that's a great segue because this is something we've been trying to do for a long, long time, right? Actually, this Squid routing through the central limit order book that I mentioned is not going to just apply to Sui itself, but we envision to make it the liquidity layer for all of Web3 and all blockchains, right? So imagine a user wants to go from Arbitrum to Optimism and take their ETH on one chain, take it on the other chain, which is actually a very popular path. Something like 40% of all cross-chain transactions are ETH to ETH. And there's no native minting and burning there, right? You have to route liquidity through somewhere. And the optimal way to do it is by setting central liquidity pools on a hub. Yeah. And this hub in the case is Sui. The reason we've been unable to do this in the past, well, is because we didn't have a fast chain with a central limit order book, right? AMMs have a lot of slippage. Even some of the like UniV3 ones, they still introduce slippage, right? But on Sui, we can do it with virtually zero slippage and very, very fast, right? So this can really be the backbone for liquidity for the wider ecosystem, right? And while from a functionality perspective, it's something we could do before, we can now do it way more efficiently and way more effectively.
Yeah. I think this is pretty amazing because it also touches on a lot of the promise that people see in blockchain, right? Like the idea of interoperability, the idea of composability, the ability to move across assets in different chains, all powered by a third chain called Sui through cross-chain communication platform such as Axelar. And so this sort of all together brings together Sui as a global trading venue for settling liquidity across all of DeFi in all of Web3, not just in Sui. I think that's the important part. You can trade assets across chains powered by Axelar and DeepBook. And that's super exciting. I think we have like, bravo, yes. I think we're all super excited about that. We have 2 more minutes, and what I wanted you to finish off with is we have a lot of builders on the stage. Some of them are DeFi builders, others in gaming, but in general, they can all use this type of infrastructure for their products. And you said something that's very important in the Axelar world is the developer experience. Can we end up talking a little bit about how do you guys think about the developer experience, and how can people start using Axelar to build their own products, to enable more user journeys and more interesting applications that they can build?
Absolutely. So the idea is that we'll have similar user experience long-term to Web2. And it's something you actually already have, right? I remember a couple of months ago, I was sitting with Ryan, and he showed me one of the games that are building on Sui. He went on his phone, started playing the game. No one even knew that it's running on Sui, right? So this is really the user experience we want to deal with. One where, as a user, you go to your phone, you have a wallet. You open your wallet, maybe you have some assets, right? You have some USDC, some USDT. And then you go to the application and you use those assets, you buy something, maybe you pay for some in-game item, whatever you want to do as a user. In this process, a user should never have to think about using any blockchain, right? That should all be abstracted away. Eventually, even Sui, Solana, Ethereum, all should be abstracted away. The user should just have to think about assets and applications, right? And this is really the future we're envisioning and building with Axelar. Now, in the early stages, the way this will apply to Sui is we can enable seamless novel user experiences like allowing a user on Arbitrum to access an application you have on Sui, right? Like, just give me an example. Like, what's your favorite application and what does it do on the high level?
What's my favorite application on
and
Sui?
Maybe not favorite, just the first that comes to mind because there's a lot.
I like trading. I like trading perps on Bluefin. I like trading spot on Dexes. I like Cetus, Aftermath. We have a lot of really good builders. But let's talk about like maybe just the simple case, trading spot on a Dex.
Trading. So okay, I think that's the use case we already talked about, right? Basically, this flow we talked about with Squid, where you'll be able to route through Sui, is effectively a seamless cross-chain transaction, right? Where you're actually doing a swap, but as a user, you don't have to bridge, swap, and bridge again. Or
it's basically expanding the market so that you're not only sort of on native assets or bridged assets on Sui, but expanded it to like all of the assets on Web3.
Exactly, exactly. And you can imagine the same happening for games, right? If you have a game on your platform, but you want a user on Arbitrum to be able to connect with it and play with MetaMask, great. They should be able to do it, right? And that's the kind of user experience we can build. But I don't want to take any credit away from you guys because that's a question I get a lot. You know, what are some of the novel user experiences you can build on Axelar? And I want to stress that Axelar is all about user experience. It's you guys that are enabling people to build these super fast, super great applications on top, and then Axelar can make them accessible from any chain and provide this seamless user experience.
Amazing. I think that's a great ending note. I think both of the teams and lots of the builders here, one of the things we care most about is user experience. And we're using all the cool innovation, programmability that we have on Sui, what you guys are building on Axelar to deliver the best user experience, not only in trading and DeFi, but as you said, in other applications such as in gaming. So Georgios, I want to thank you for your time. This was super exciting. You made some very ambitious announcements. Axelar is coming Sui. Axelar is coming to Sui. We're all very excited. So, holding my breath. Thank you.